Okay. Can you hear me now? So, am I back on the air? I'll have to wait for you to. Okay, all right. I'm very sorry about this. I don't know what happened. Perhaps I need to get a new cord, USB cord, for my microphone. I will have to do that tomorrow. Okay. What I had done earlier was that I cleaned out the cache and I rebooted the computer, and then I got some sort of message from Microsoft about how making sure that all my peripherals were working, and I skipped that. Maybe that was a mistake, and I had to do a hard reboot of the computer because it was stuck and wouldn't sign on. So let's go back to the beginning here. The theme of today's show, which has been delayed 25 minutes. Once again, my deepest apologies, is the scum of the earth. Start with a story from the Daily Mail. Black Lives Matter protesters who screamed "F the white people" at Pittsburgh diners and drank their beer insist they were not the aggressors, and that the elderly couple invited them for a drink after they were harassed. That's to say, after the protesters were harassed. The demonstrators were speaking out after a video of them yelling at diners in Rochester, New York, and swiping a drink from an elderly couple and downing it in front of them was shared on social media. The protesters were heard calling the diners embarrassments and surrounding the tables. Even though people saw that whole thing, they still saw me as an aggressor. This, according to the protester who rejoices in the moniker Nikkei Craft, spelled Nique, classy. Cell phone footage shows the protesters taking over the outdoor dining space, with Craft approaching an older couple's table before drinking their beer in front of them. Another smashed a glass from the table. One protester, identified as Lorenzo Rulli, told the diners, "F the white people that built the system, F the 12, and apparently that has something to do with the police. And I'm looking at a picture of the glorious named Nikkei Craft. She is an enormous black woman. Here she is drinking a pint of beer, and she has a t-shirt that says "Nazi lives don't matter." So does that mean that people who don't support Black Lives Matter vocally enough are Nazis? Does it mean that people who still, in this time of terror and systemic racism, actually go out to restaurants? You're only allowed to eat outside, and eat food, drink beer. That makes them Nazis. Apparently, I can see why Black Lives Matter is so very popular. Others eating at the restaurant pick up their belongings and leave after demonstrators call them an embarrassment. The demonstrations are in response to several Black Americans who have died in police custody, with the recently shared footage of the death of Daniel Prude in Rochester in March sparking the new wave of outrage. Yes, this is a man who his brother called the police because he was schizo, and he had thrown himself headfirst down a flight of stairs, went out into the street, took his clothes off. When the police came, he began spitting at them, so they put a hood over his head so that they could not be infected with COVID-19 or HIV or whatever else this man might have had. And he died several days later after going unconscious. Oh, he was high on PCP, which used to be called angel dust. It's a very, very dangerous drug that causes people to, well, go schizo immediately. Similar scenes have played out across the country, with a diner in Washington, D.C. last week cornered by a group of anti-racism protesters outside a restaurant In another incident, diners in Rochester were also confronted by a large group of demonstrators. And here we see the famous picture from the Washington Post of a solitary white woman sitting outside wearing a mask with a bunch of young white idiots with clenched fists screaming abuse at her. She had said that she would not be bullied, but since she has subsequently expressed, how would I say, fulsome support for Black Lives Matter, I guess she is capable of being bullied. "We're shutting your party down," one woman was seen shouting in the face of New York diners as demonstrators smashed the customers' glasses in front of their faces, broke plates, overturned chairs, and chanted at them to get out. A second video taken in Pittsburgh over the weekend shows a demonstrator speaking with a megaphone while walking next to a cyclist. It's unclear what is said, but the demonstrator nudges the cyclist with his microphone. The cyclist swats the demonstrator in response, but a second protester reportedly hits the man from behind with a skateboard. According to Nikkei Kraft, who identifies as non-binary because of course she does, the incident sparked when protesters marched through the area and 3 men shouted "Blue Lives Matter." It's unclear if these men were diners or pedestrians in the area. When protesters approached the group, one man reportedly swung at people. Nikkei Kraft told the Post-Gazette that one man grabbed Kraft's hair. Yes, of course, because white people just can't stop touching the hair of Black women. White people are just obsessed with black hair. And placed a hand on Kraft's chest, saying he was trying to stop a confrontation from happening. After the initial, Kraft said that the older man seen in footage chastised protester actions. His wife, however, according to Kraft, invited her over for a drink and to discuss the situation. Discuss, yes. A friendly discussion, a peaceful discussion. So being a theatrical, snarky type of person that I am, I said, "I don't have time to wait for you to order another beer. I'll take the one you have." Kraft did not know the man who swung the skateboard at the cyclist. Yes, skateboards, weapon of choice amongst the peaceful protesters of Black Lives Matter and FA, because it gives you deniability. Police in Pittsburgh are said to have launched investigation. Both clips that were during Sunday protest or assault, as it. The footage of the diners in Pittsburgh approach sparked another. Ricardo De Niro said these terror about Bob Dylan wrote, "Endgame is for this insult smash style of protesting." To it. Enzo Rulli, who wore a purple shirt and shouted demonstrators that day. It's always the right wing who is responsible for these incidents, and of course, ultimately, because of the division that he has sowed in American society. "We don't target businesses," Rulli said. "Our restaurant industry in the city supports us very much." Yes, because restaurateurs love mobs of people who invade their restaurants, screaming abuse, causing the diners to flee, presumably without having paid for their food and beverages. He added that people at the restaurant were cheering for the demonstrators, and he only approached the older couple after they disparaged him. Yes, of course they were cheering for them. "The reason I engaged the individual man and his wife is because her husband called me an embarrassment and disgusting." GOP Senator Pat Toomey said in response to the videos that these are crimes, but Rulli doesn't think the footage will cast anti-racism protests in a negative light. No, that's impossible. Honestly, the protesters could never be in a good light in this city until the people who have the power to convey the message properly are doing so, whatever that might mean. In Rochester, a man attending a demonstration was struck by a car on Sunday, shared by Carolyn Delvecchio Hoffman. Footage shows a group of demonstrators standing in an intersection during the city's third night of protest. Protesters watch a vehicle turning right out of the intersection with a screech, but a few voices suddenly scream out in warning. Seconds later, a red vehicle accelerates into the crowd and the driver unleashes a wave of yellow spray paint at protesters. Oh dear. Meanwhile, the unidentified man was crouching down on the concrete and did not see the vehicle coming in time. He manages to jump in the air, but is still hit by the vehicle and thrown to the ground. The group of witnesses then call for volunteer medics as the man remains on the ground. Hoffman said the driver was not arrested at the scene, and she added that over the course of the night, she was shot with rubber bullets and pepper spray during confrontations with the Rochester Police Department. You see, these people have got it into their heads that there will not be any consequences ever for their actions. And I think, it could be that soon enough America will be as bad as South Africa, where I have learned that people who do not want to get carjacked install tanks of gasoline under their car, and they can press a button and they become flame throwers. America's not up to that, or has not devolved to that state yet. On Saturday, police used batons, pepper balls, and tear gas to push back about 2,000 protesters who marched toward the public safety building on Saturday night, chanting Black Lives Matter and Daniel Prude. The Rochester Police Department said in a statement that protesters had ignored their orders to disperse and that some hurled bottled rocks and fireworks at officers. A group of local elders arrived early to the protest to act as a human barricade between the demonstrators and the Rochester Police Department. The mayor of Rochester on Monday promised reforms are coming to the city's police department. And as Steve Saylor jokes, the reform will probably be a new regulation that no Black person who doesn't want to get arrested will get arrested. They just, no, you're not arresting me today. Okay, fine. Maybe we'll catch you later. Now, you may have seen the video of a Black restaurant, a McDonald's manager in America who was harassed by a group of, it's obviously a Black neighborhood, of Black demonstrators, and they have the obligatory bullhorn, and they are screaming abuse, assaulting him, common assault. They won't let him get back to behind the counter. And I thought, yes, the scum of the earth. Here we have a working man, who is attempting to earn an honest day's pay. And I guess since he isn't out on the street screaming Black Lives Matter, that must make him a Nazi too. Reforms to the police department. Rochester Police Chief and his entire senior staff resign amid fallout over Daniel Prude's Spitwood death, as he defends his actions and says events over the past week are an attempt to destroy my character and integrity. Rochester Police Chief LaRon, L-A''R-O-N, Singletary, he's a Black man, his Deputy Chief Joseph Morabito, and Chief of Administration Mark Simmons have all retired. Mayor Lovely Warren, that's her name, Lovely, made the shock announcement on Tuesday and said the mass departure could include other senior commanders as well. It comes amid criticism of the city's handling of the suffocation death of Daniel Prude, a 41-year-old Black man, on March the 23rd. Yeah. Singletary, who spent his entire career at the Rochester Police Department, was appointed chief in April 2019. And I have a story about this man from the Spectrum local news in Rochester. Interim Rochester Police Department Chief LaRon Singletary seen as beacon of hope. The man designated by Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren to be the next police chief said he was inspired by watching the men and women in blue uniforms head in and out of the department's Genesee section office in Bull's Head Plaza. His father bought him a police scanner as a child, and he was sworn onto the force at the age of 20. He said, there is so much going on in law enforcement. It's trying to get people to see us in a different light, and we need to try something new. We need to do some innovative things. One of the things that I want to do is bridge this gap that is sometimes seen in the community and across this country as no matter whether it happens here in Rochester, it can happen in California, Texas, Florida, Georgia. It has an impact for law enforcement here. We have to deal with some ramifications of things that are not necessarily occurring here in Rochester. It may occur somewhere else. So as a leader in law enforcement, I have to be able to motivate the troops, ensure that this community has trust in me and the men and women who are under me. Yes. Who is his big inspiration? Well, his father. My dad was one of the individuals who said grades matter. If you get good grades, you can get anything you want. My brother was the athlete in the family. He got him baseball Basketball and football gear. I played 1 year of high school football. My father knew I wanted to be a police officer, so he got me a police scanner. I used to ride around the city on my bicycle, listening to the police scanner and jump calls, respond to calls in the community when listening to the scanner. So I knew I wanted to be a police officer at a very young age, and that's what I tried to tell you today. Know what you want to do. That seems like quite a decent fellow, and I can only hope that he and the other two senior officials have been well compensated for what appears to be their enforced retirement at the direction of Mayor Lovely Ann Warren of Rochester, New York. You know, in recent years, there has been a great deal of support on the right for looking at reforms to the police in America. I mean, people on the right have had the same complaints as people on the left. The relentless militarization of police forces, the ubiquitous us versus them attitude, etc., etc. But with the uprisings that we see in America now, actually, if you want to go back to the uprisings in Baltimore and Ferguson, Missouri, that pretty much put the kibosh on right-wing support for police reform, because if the alternative, then most people are going to support the police, regardless of whatever misgivings they may have about how police sometimes conduct themselves. So, so long as we're speaking out about scum, let's talk about Michael Cohen, who is a truly despicable man. President Donald Trump's ex-fixer, this is from NBC News, said that his former boss is a racist cult leader who would be wise to resign when he's faced with potential charges. Cohen spoke with NBC News' Lester Holt ahead of the release Tuesday of his new book, Disloyal, a memoir, which discusses his experience working for Trump. In this book, obviously, I described Trump as a cult leader, and I was in this cult. So one of the purposes of writing the book is really from one former cult member to different ones. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Open your eyes, as I have, and I want you to appreciate that Donald Trump cares for no one or anything other than himself. Lester, if you remember the 2016 debates, you may have seen Lester Holt moderate one of them, and Holt will have identified himself as a member of Hillary Clinton's staff. It's clear watching Donald Trump going back through the years that he's very comfortable with black people, all sorts of black people. And in fact, as far as politicians go, I don't know that I've ever seen one more comfortable with black people than Donald Trump, including scary people like Mike Tyson, for instance. Trump is known for his personal generosity, $100 tips routinely, and also talking to ordinary people, for instance, people who come to him looking for work. I mean, this is well known. Cohen said Trump's backers have to defend his indefensible actions, mentioning the Atlantic report last week, in which several sources with first-hand knowledge of Trump's remarks said he referred to as American service members killed in combat as loot. And Trump has repeatedly denied the accuracy of the story, as have administration officials and allies. I mean, who could possibly accept this? Cohen said Trump's remarks, but when you're in the Trump cult, you have no choice to accept it, but to accept it. Yeah. And does this story have to mention his conviction? Oh, yeah. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. The last paragraph mentioned it. Cohen began serving a 3-year prison sentence last year after a conviction for financial crimes and lying to Congress. He was released in July to serve the rest of the sentence from home because of the coronavirus pandemic. Cohen turned on Trump as he was under federal investigation in 2018 and later gave testimony before Congress lambasting the president. The White House has dismissed Cohen's book as fan fiction. He readily admits to lying routinely, but expects people to believe him now so that he can make money from book sales. White House Deputy Press Secretary Brian Morgenstern said in a statement, Cohen has said that he lied for the president's benefit. So, peaceful protesters, scum. Let's talk about journalists who are also scum of the earth. Before we get into that, let's talk about who was the chief of Allied Forces. He later became president of Columbia University and then president of the United States from 1950 through 1961. He held address in 4 major wars. Of these involved are amongst the most influential and most productive eminence. We yet realize that America's leadership prestige depends not merely on unmatched material progress, riches, and milling, but on how we use power in the interests of world peace and human betterment. Progress toward these noble goals is persistently now engulfing the world. He's talking to say vital element in keeping the peace is his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known by any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make improvisation defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military more than the net income of all United States corporations. The conjunction of an immense military establishment and experience, the total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood evolved, so is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our people, methods, and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Then he goes on to talk about the technological revolution during recent decades. And he has some very interesting things to say about what we know as scientism. Today, the solitary inventor tinkering in his shop and overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The aspect of domination of employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet, in holding research and discovery in respect as it should, we must also be alert and opposite danger that poly could become the captive of a scientific technological elite. And in this, depicted the COVID-19 panic, the sanitary dictatorship disaster. The so-called experts say that the world is coming to an end, even as ever that COVID-19 is a disease which, while unfortunately is the very old people over 80, that is practically no threat to people under the age of 50, no threat. That is practically no threat to people under the age of 50, no threat to children. And of course, 94% of the people who have died of COVID-19 or who death has been ascribed to this cause, 94% have what they call morbidities. And so Eisenhower shocked a lot of people. Of course, Eisenhower's Second World War seemed to be saying that the military cannot be trusted, or at least the military-industrial complex cannot be trusted. And his message seems to have been forgotten by people who call themselves liberals. This is from CNN. Trump launches unprecedented attack on military leadership he appointed, by Barbara Starr and Ryan Brown. President Donald Trump launched an unprecedented public attack against the leadership of the U.S. military on Monday, accusing them of waging wars to boost the profits of defense manufacturing companies. I'm not saying the military is in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't, because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs and the planes and make everything else stay happy, he said at a White House news conference. Trump's extraordinary comments come as several defense officials tell CNN relations between the president and Pentagon leadership are becoming increasingly strained. They also followed efforts by Trump to convince the public that he had not said a bunch of things which were obvious lies. A bunch of anonymous sources. Some have expressed concern that the president's Monday accusations against the military's top brass could have a corrosive effect. Of course, this isn't the first time that Trump has attacked military leadership. Some time ago, he went after them from Iraq and Afghanistan. What's the plan? What's the plan to win in Afghanistan? If there's no plan to win, why is America there? Why are American men and women still dying there? The Chief of Staff of the Army, General James McConville, declined to comment directly on Trump's statement on Tuesday, but rejected the idea that military commanders are influenced by defense firms. I can assure the American people that the senior leaders would only recommend sending our troops to combat when it's required in national security and the last resort. Yes, staying in Afghanistan since 2001 definitely required in national security and the last resort. We take this very, very seriously in how we make our recommendations, and I think that's all I can really say on that. I feel strongly about that. Oh, top commanders exhausted and worried. Wow, they're exhausted too. Apparently everyone who opposes Trump is exhausted. Given that they are planning a coup against the president, it doesn't seem like the sort of thing that exhausted people. Oh, the entire Joint Chiefs have made it clear they want to eliminate what they see as the divisive symbols of the Confederacy. General Milley, did not hold back on the issue in appearance before Congress in July, stating that those officers turned their back on the oath. That's not how Dwight David Eisenhower saw it, strangely enough. But I don't know Eisenhower. Who cares about him? He only won or helped to win the major wars in human history. You know, he was the top general, and he was the president of the United States. But of course, what would he know about such things? Here's something interesting about Dwight Eisenhower. That when he was president, he was sent a letter from a citizen asking about Robert E. Lee. This is from CivilWarProfiles.com. Surely an exemplary officer in general like Eisenhower would also regard Robert E. Lee as a traitor, would he not? Basically, that was the question asked of then President Eisenhower in August 1960. During the Republican National Convention of that year, Eisenhower mentioned that he kept a picture of Robert E. Lee in his office. That prompted a dentist from New York to send a letter, Leon Scott. The letter says, in part, the most outstanding thing that Robert E. Lee did was to devote his best efforts to the destruction of the United States government. I'm sure that you do not say that a person who tries to destroy our government is worthy of being held as one of our heroes. Will you please tell me why you hold him in such high esteem? And he responded, I would say first that we need to understand that at the time of the war between the states, the issue of secession had remained unresolved for more than 70 years. Men of probity, character, public standing, and unquestioned loyalty, both North and South, had disagreed over this issue as a matter of principle from the day our Constitution was adopted. General Robert E. Lee was, in my estimation, one of the supremely gifted men produced by our nation. He believed unswervingly in the constitutional validity of his cause, which until 1865 was still an arguable question in America. He was a poised and inspiring leader, true to the high trust reposed in him by millions of his fellow citizens. He was thoughtful yet demanding of his officers and men, forbearing with captured enemies, but ingenious, unrelenting, and personally courageous in battle, and never disheartened by a reverse or obstacle. Through all his many trials, he remained selfless almost to a fault and unfailing in his faith in God. Taken altogether, he was noble as a leader and as a man, and unsullied as I read the pages of our history. From deep conviction, I simply say this: a nation of men of Lee's caliber would be unconquerable in spirit and soul. Indeed, to the degree that present-day American youth will strive to emulate his rare qualities, including his devotion to this land as revealed in his painstaking efforts to help heal the nation's wounds, once the bitter struggle was over, we, in our own time of danger in a divided world, will be strengthened and our love of freedom sustained. Such are the reasons that I proudly display the picture of this great American on my office wall. But again, what would he know about that, eh? What would Dwight Eisenhower know about that? And of course, Eisenhower was not the first to speak out on the question of the military-industrial complex. Here's Major General Smedley Butler. 1881 to 1940 was a United States Marine Corps Major General, the highest rank authorized at the time, and at the time of his death was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. This is what he said in a speech in 1933. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. So Trump gave a Labor Day speech, and the New York Daily News says that Trump lobbied playground insults at Joe Biden in a nakedly political speech from the White House on Monday, calling the Democratic nominee stupid and even berating his son. Speaking behind a podium on the White House North Portico, Trump barely acknowledged the fact that it was Labor Day and instead dedicated most of his freewheeling, nearly hour-long remarks to harsh partisan attacks as millions of American workers remained unemployed because of the coronavirus pandemic. No, millions of American workers remain unemployed because of the coronavirus pandemic. Biden is a stupid person. You know that, Trump told assembled reporters. You're not going to write it, but you know it. The president also dredged up his since-long debunked corruption accusations against Biden's son over his work for Ukrainian energy company. These corruption accusations have not been debunked. They have been rebutted. They have never been refuted. But journalists are scum and the enemy of the people. What does evil Captain Kangaroo John Bolton have to say? According to Mediaite, Bolton defended President Donald Trump against bombshell claims he insulted and disrespected the military during a trip to France in 2018, but then seconds later turned around and called out Trump for disparaging the top generals at the Pentagon during a Labor Day White House briefing. Of course, John Bolton never met a war that he didn't like. John Bolton is the neocon. often reminded when we hear about Trump's gaffes, as they called them, or they used to call them. Now they pretty much just call them Nazi rants. Michael Kinsley, former host of Crossfire, former editor of the New Republic, famously wrote in the New York Times in 1988, "A gaffe is when a politician tells the truth, some obvious truth he isn't supposed to say, such as, why is the United States still in Afghanistan? My country, Canada, devoted about a decade to this pointless war and got out, not completely out, mind you." Here's a question, here's a story from RT, and of course, yeah, we'll just regard that. Putin, Joe, a former Republican congressman, and never gone for wanting war, but many have spoken of the same, including Dwight D. Eisenhower, whom the MSNBC host bizarrely cited. And yes, so you're going to bring up Eisenhower's farewell address to attack Trump's attacks on the military. Scarborough, in his own tweet reaction, seems to be unaware of what Trump was referring to. Scarborough tweeted, "This is such a deeply ignorant and insulting view of American military leadership. From Dwight Eisenhower to Colin Powell, it has been our military leaders familiar with the hell of war who have hated it the most." As some critics suggested, Scarborough should probably educate himself on the fact that Dwight Eisenhower, a five-star general during World War II, actually coined the informal term that has become so popularly used by anti-war activists on both sides of the political aisle. Molly Hemingway tweeted, "Oh dear, MSNBC host apparently completely unfamiliar with Dwight Eisenhower's famous military-industrial complex speech, or worse, he doesn't understand it. Also, maybe Colin Powell, curveball, anyone? Not the best example to use here." Trump's words today about the military-industrial complex's power in the Pentagon evoke Eisenhower's warning of same in his 1961 farewell address, worth rereading today. Scarborough's blunders didn't stop there, as he also brought up Colin Powell, an odd choice to cite when talking about military leaders being anti-war, as Powell is most famous for his role in arguing for the U.S. to invade Iraq in 2003 when he was Secretary of State. The military invasion is often referred to today, even by President Trump, as an example of an unjustified and politically motivated decision, one based on the unfounded claim that the country was potentially harboring weapons of mass destruction and posed a direct threat to the U.S. While Trump detractors have had reactions similar to Scarborough's and used Trump's latest soundbite as further proof of his alleged disdain for the military, others have celebrated the criticism of Glenn Greenwald. "Oh yes, perish the thought that Pentagon officials are eager to sustain and war for power and profit. Are you in the third grade? Google someone called Dwight Eisenhower and see what he said about this. It's unprecedented. CNN so jingoistic." Yes, I suppose it would be unreasonable for us to expect that Joe Scarborough, former congressman and leading TV meat puppet, would really know anything Dwight Eisenhower, because that was a long time ago. And what possible reference, relevant rather, could that have to what's going on today? I mean, it's not relevant. Military and complex. I mean, come on, what are you, some conspiracy theory? All right, conspiracy theory. No, it's too funny. It's too funny. Jennifer, she is not pleased. She, of course, is a neocon, a never-Trumper, and not what you call anti-war. Again, careful about what I say about because, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, I was briefly banned for calling her a monger. So, no, I won't. She writes, President Trump's battle against reported his top military claims to revere but deeply resents. Multiple organizations, include Post. Oh, yes. Did the Post go along with weapons of mass destruction nonsense? Yes, they. The Post largely engineered the Russiagate fallacy. Yes, yes, they did. Trump can deny his animosity until the cows come home, but he is unable to articulate real respect for those who serve. Oh, let's quote from my two Post reporters, and Post reporters never make up quotes or don't traffic in anonymous sources who essentially repeat what the Post already said. Oh, and let's from his niece, Mary Trump, who made some coin writing a book. These are despicable people. Meanwhile, Humphrey Goldberg, who was a military veteran, not U.S. military, but Israeli military, he keeps insisting that it's a story about how the military is accurate. Oh, Jonathan Chait writes, New York Magazine, no, Trump is not threatening the military-industrial complex's profit. Yeah, sure he isn't. Because Trump wants to get America out of Afghanistan, and he's reduced troops in Germany. The United States still has troops in Germany. Is an interesting question, but yes. See, let's poison the well here, Jonathan Chait. In short order, Molly Hemingway, Glenn Greenwald, who was retweeted by Trump himself today, the whole of pro-Trump trolling, anyone who disagrees with me, is scrambled to cast Trump's remark as merely echoing Dwight Eisenhower's famous warning about the military-industrial complex. One of the favorite gambits of Trump's defenders is to insist that national security professionals only oppose him because he stands athwart the American empire. And it is certainly true that militants agree with some of Trump's policies, his opposition to NATO, his portrayal of the current at Russia, and in some cases, desire to accelerate removal of troops from Afghanistan. It is also true the American military brass cycle in and out of the top defense contractors in a way that corruptly incentivizes them to support higher spending. But the notion that this is the reason or even a reason for their opposition to Trump is completely ludicrous. Yes, of course, it's completely ludicrous. Oh, this is too rich. According to Hill, the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg told MSNBC yesterday that he believes fear on a kind of superficial level of a Twitter mob and a fear of personal safety kept his sources from going with their allegation that President Trump called fallen service members and suckers in 2018. Goldberg was pressed by MSNBC host Chris Hayes during an interview Monday night about the sources. He said he pressed the sources to go on the record and also mentioned November's presidential election as a reason some may not have wanted to do so. I think there's a couple of things. There is this idea of a code, you don't interfere. I think people are torn. On one hand, they don't want to interfere in democratic electoral processes. On the other hand, you were talking about a president who is unlike anything they have ever experienced. I think there is also fear. We see this across the board in Donald Trump's Washington. There is a fear on a kind of superficial level of a Twitter mob. There's fear on a kind of superficial level of a Twitter mob. That sounds like a really solid reason. There's also real fear of personal safety, fear for your family, fear for what you put everyone around you through if you started talking about this sort of thing. These are the people who have sicked mobs on people who support Trump and justified their actions. They're scum. J. Hogan Gidley says these are disgusting. He was Trump's 2020 National Press Secretary. He responded to the Atlantic article, these are disgusting, grotesque, reprehensible lies. I was there in Paris and the president never said those things. In fact, he would never even think such vile thoughts because I know from firsthand knowledge that President Trump absolutely loves, respects, and reveres the brave men and women of the United States military. He always has and he always will. These weak, pathetic, cowardly background sources do not have the courage or decency to put their names to these false accusations because they know how completely ludicrous they are. It's sickening that they would hide in the shadows to knowingly try and hurt the morale of our great military simply for an attack on a political opponent. From Deadline, The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg addresses Trump's loser remarks, talks using anonymous sources. Yes, okay. I spent a lot of my time covering dictatorships in the Middle East, and so I'm familiar with this kind of discourse. It is a threat. It is meant to intimidate. And of course, the military hinting about a coup, which they have been doing ever since 2017. No, that's not meant to intimidate, is it? No, that's something completely different. And anything that they do is fully justified, of course, because they're anti-Trump. He is threatening their meal ticket, and we can't have that. Let's go to the chat. Start at the top. Yes, okay. Blame the flowers. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, I don't know. I can't believe they removed their bandwidth interference so fast. I suppose it could be that I tend to leave my computer on. That could be part of the problem. But then, I rebooted it today, and I had to reboot it several times before I could make it work. Now I'm rather worried about turning the thing off ever again. Okay, so this is the BLM Rochester Beer Hall Putsch, says William Hicks. That's a good one. I like that. Chogokin 666 says, I can't help but think they've been instructed to attack the few remaining open businesses. Mike F. Skateboarding is becoming a crime. Chogokin 666. Yes. Get rid of the skateboards. Whatever happened to the classic saloon keeper with the shotgun, says William Hicks. I don't know. I suppose if one were to protect oneself from a BLM mob, of course, the people committing assault, threatening people are not going to be prosecuted. But if you defend yourself, you will be prosecuted, as we saw with that couple in St. Louis. Luckily, the governor announced that he was not going to allow prosecution to proceed, that he would simply pardon them. MCT says, I can honestly say that I've seldom been so fatigued by anything as I am these truly, these unruly children over whom no one will exercise control. It's also exhausting, says Mike F. Yes, there's a lot of that going around. Chokokin 666 says, skateboards and bullhorns are the signifiers of those with malintent. I would outlaw them if I had my druthers. Goose says, I lost all my druthers in a tragic boating accident. John S. says, I'm not too much of a gun nut, but all of us should be getting concealed carry licenses and the tools, therefore, if legal in your state. The article about Oregon, outside Portland, indicated that gun sales in the vicinity of Portland are just tyranny and slavery of the most extreme liberty. Edmund Burke said something similar. He said that people have to control themselves or they will be controlled. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Let's see. Is there anyone on this? Okay, live stream. I don't know. As I say, it'd probably be a good idea for me to replace the USB cable for the microphone. It is. It has been twisted, and moved, and I plug it and unplug it on a regular basis. I've been unplugging it from the front because I have to figure out which is the wire in the back because I have so many USB cables attached to my computer. And if I have the microphone plugged in, it means that the speakers don't work. David Rice says, you have to admit Trump doesn't garner a lot of loyalty. No, I would disagree. He does garner a lot of loyalty, but Trump continues to face the problem that I warned of in 2016 before he was elected. It's a question of elites that James Burnham wrote in the Machiavellians about power being controlled by elites. It's always controlled by elites. It's not controlled by ideas or anything like that. And the elites, what the elites say is typically to bolster their own hegemony. The problem that Trump had is that there is no alternative elite waiting in the wings to replace our corrupt elite. The existence of an alternative elite is not permitted. To give you an example, Franklin Roosevelt initiated a sea change in American politics when he became president in 1933, and he had a staff, a cabinet that it was ready to go, of people that he knew were on his side. Trump can't just pick anybody for cabinet posts or for administration positions, because he needs to, or he would prefer to see a previous demonstration of some sort of competence, which meant that he hired a bunch of elite people who proceeded to betray him. And they all wrote books about it. And they all got money out of turning on Trump. Let's see, Cuomo posted a self-congratulatory video on the New York State DOL Twitter. This is the same Twitter that people are angry about not getting the LWA assistance after 5 weeks. You can imagine the response he got, says Chogokin666. Debrea says people do not change, circumstances permanently changing. Michael Cohen saw a opening for a $50 million book, so he took it, he lied, and he took the money. Donald Robertson says we should stay in Afghanistan forever. We should just do it on the cheap with a minimal loss of life and treasure. Well, the problem is that no one in Afghanistan can be trusted. They've seen foreigners, and the foreigners always leave. They play along with who shows the most might or who offers them the most money. And as soon as their backs are turned, they try to kill them. That's the way it works with Afghanistan. That's the way it's always going to work in Afghanistan. The only policy that would have worked in Afghanistan was a genocide. And since Afghanistan is essentially a collection of mud huts and goat herders, there is nothing that they have that is worth stealing. The Taliban government was removed in short order. In 2001, it should have been, see you later. See you later, guys. No. Afghanistan apparently was going to be remolded on modern Western ideas. Well, the Russians tried exactly the same thing. The Russians didn't merely send soldiers and armaments to Afghanistan. They imported a whole modern infrastructure of leaders, teachers, scientists, etc., all to no avail. Colin Powell, yes, Colin Powell is a strange fellow, to quote as an exemplar. Don from Beyond says, I hope Kevin talks about Trump's actions against the systemic racism and white privilege indoctrination. Perhaps Casey Peterson's viral video was the straw that broke the camel's back. I did talk about that last week, actually. Let's see. Talk about the Civil War. I don't, again, it seems outrageous to people that there was a secession movement in the United States. The states that joined, the 13 original colonies in 1776, they didn't think that the U.S. Constitution was a once-in, never-out pact. Because if it had been made clear to them at the time that it was once in, never out, they never would have been in. I should think that's fairly obvious, but of course it's unreasonable to expect our talking heads or even our leaders to understand anything about the Civil War, except that apparently Alexander Hamilton was a black man. I'll just repeat, of course, that the rumor that Alexander Hamilton was black was fomented by John Adams, who hated Hamilton's guts. Oh, from CNN, the first word in fake news: Trump visibly distressed over Atlantic story fallout from claims he disparaged the military. Yes, can you imagine that, being visibly distressed because of outrageous lies? Trump doesn't have any feelings. Oh, but also he is ridiculous for showing feelings when people are lying about it. Charlotte Alter, who is a political correspondent for Time magazine, says, update: 7 dozen interviews so far in southeastern Wisconsin and suburban Milwaukee. 0 people have mentioned the losers or suckers comment unprompted. When I bring it up, every Trump voter says they don't believe it or it was taken out of context. And I responded to Charlotte Alter, they don't believe it because it is unbelievable. Imagine knowing of the insults Trump supposedly uttered about the military, sitting on it for 2 years, and then going public just before the election. Of course, no names. The brazen shamelessness of today's journalists know no bounds. You notice that after Russiagate was exposed as a tissue of lies, one might have thought that American journalists would be a little wary about coming out with more whoppers. But no, as boss Jim Geddes said in Citizen Kane to Charles Foster Kane, that you look like the man who's going to need more than one lesson. Because journalists are seemingly incapable of learning anything. Veterans are divided about reports Trump disparaged military, according to Associated Press. Oh, here's an outstanding member of the American military, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman. According to Molly Hemingway in The Federalist, the most interesting thing about Byron York's exhaustively reported and richly impeachment book, Obsession, Inside the Washington Establishment's Never-Ending War on Trump, is that the whistleblower who filed the official complaint that got impeachment rolling isn't ever identified. It turns out that the heated discussion over the whistleblower, who was previously identified by Real Clear Investigations as as I'll just call him Bagpipe, okay? And I'm not being whimsical or fey here. I was on Luke Ford's stream and I mentioned this man's name, but bam, the live stream got nuked immediately. This was a diversion from allowing the American people to understand who was the actual instigator of the failed effort to oust Trump from office. Rather than being a witness who independently supported the claims of the whistleblower, the National Security Council's Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman was the driving force behind the entire operation, according to the book's interviews with key figures in the impeachment probe and other evidence. The whistleblower's information came directly from Vindman, investigators determined. Vindman was the person on the call who went to the whistleblower after the call to give the whistleblower the information he needed to file his complaint, said Representative Lee Zeldin, Republican of New York. For all intents and purposes, Vindman is the whistleblower here, but he was able to get somebody else to do his dirty work for him, explained one senior congressional aide. Never mind that this whistleblower law does not apply to the President of the United States. Vindman was the only person at the NSC listening in on the infamous call between Trump and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky to be concerned by it. Vindman immediately began talking to his identical twin brother, Lieutenant Colonel Evgeny Vindman. What were these names here? Yeah, Evgeny. Many Americans called Evgeny? No, these brothers are both born in the Ukraine. The twins both complained to NSC counsel John Eisenberg. Alex Vindman talked about it with his direct supervisor, Tim Morrison, who was also in on the call. He talked about it with another NSC lawyer, Michael Ellis. Vindman testified that he talked to only 2 people outside the NSC. One was George Kent, a State Department official who dealt with Ukraine. He refused to say who the other person was. Both Vindman and Representative Adam Schiff of California, who led the impeachment process, strenuously resisted any attempt by investigators to discuss who the other individual was, admitting only that it was a member of the intelligence community, the same nebulous descriptor used for the whistleblower. In his complaint, the whistleblower claimed multiple White House officials with direct knowledge of the call described to him the contents of the conversation. It is unclear if he was sourcing his knowledge just to multiple Vindmans or any other White House officials. Now, the description of the call appeared to come from the White House's rough transcript, which of course was released in short order by Trump. And this transcript Vindman helped prepare. It repeated Vindman's unique interpretation of the call as seeking foreign interference in a campaign. It mentioned that lawyers had been informed and Vindman had done that. The complaint also included information from public news reports. At first, Schiff publicly promised the whistleblower would testify, and the attempt by the White House to thwart that was fought vigorously. But then news broke the office had worked with the whistleblower prior to him filing his complaint. Schiff switched his stance to refusing to allow the whistleblower to testify. What's more, he refused to allow any investigation into how the Ukraine investigation began. How about that? And of course, the media amplified all of this nonsense. We have the transcript of the call, but that's not enough, apparently. We need to have this interpreted by Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Michael Goodwin writes in the New York Post, New York Times' sleazy narrative on Trump is nothing but a joke. A former cook at the New York Times once explained why he kept reading the paper even though he never trusted it. I want to see what they're up to. What they're up to now is staggering. Not content with 4 years of biased coverage of Trump, the Times has plunged headfirst into new depths of partisanship and deceit. Just when you thought its dirty tricks couldn't get any dirtier, it proves you wrong. A few samples from last week tell the tale. A headline on Monday's top front page story said Trump insults the mayor of Portland, while Biden calls his rival reckless, even-handed, right? Another front page story that day about Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin gratuitously mentioned that Mnuchin's liberal father said he was appalled by his son's politics. Inside, reporter Michael Schmidt, one of the paper's errand boys for the deep state, alleged the Justice Department secretly, quote, kept investigators from completing an examination of President Trump's decades-long personal and business ties to Russia, unquote. Schmidt shared a Pulitzer for his coverage of the Russia hysteria. In fact, the Times coverage largely created hysteria and was proven to be fundamentally misleading because there was no collusion or obstruction. Yet snowballs have better odds than the Times will confess its errors. But Schmidt hasn't given up on Russia. Naturally, Monday's article, excerpted from his book, uses only anonymous sources. The Times used to strictly limit anonymous sources. They are only sources in virtually every scoop involving Trump. Within hours, Schmidt's claims were shut down by Andrew Weissman, the leader of counsel Robert Mueller's team. And keep in mind that Weissman moved heaven and earth to try to get a ridiculous understanding of collusion to be the same one that the United States government used against, what was it, AT&T, which was thrown out. No. It was an accounting firm, Arthur Andersen. And it was thrown out by no less than the United States Supreme Court. Tuesday's front page was like a Joe Biden campaign, and the lead story was and said Republicans distorted Biden's records on crime policing at their convention. The fact that he meets the father of this fellow who was shot in Kenosha, and this father is a straight lunatic and Jew hater, and it was made very, very clear. This man has a maniacal hatred of Jesus Christ and tweets a photo of Jesus in a toilet bowl. That's exactly the sort of person that Joe Biden would want to meet, right? The Democratic National Convention is basically a long sob story about these wonderful young men that the police keep limiting, notwithstanding that George Floyd was, almost 50 years old, and he was a convicted felon, a violent man. Maybe it's really not such a good idea to get stupidly high and then commit crimes or attempt to commit crimes. On Wednesday, executive editor Kay's team used deceptive photo cropping to reshape reality. Trump's visit to Kenosha included a devastated area that looked as if a bomb hit it, instead of those mostly peaceful protests, as the media propagandists call them. The Times hid the devastation from readers. A front-page photo focused tightly on Trump with no rubble visible. A separate picture of equal size showed a handful of people protesting the president's visit. What arson, what looting? Trump's the problem. In case you still didn't get the point, a front-page box referred readers to a story labeled Trump's falsehoods about unrest, i.e. riots, and Biden. Apparently, Biden always tells the truth about Trump. Thursday's top story cast doubt on the rush to find a COVID vaccine, with the headline saying concerns that science is being rushed in the name of politics. I would agree that science is being rushed in the name of politics. Whose fault is that? That apparently Trump is personally responsible for whatever number that the media is pushing of Americans who are alleged to have died of COVID-19. And the lockdown is never going to end until there's a vaccine. I mean, Gavin Newsom has pretty much made that clear. Others have said similar. Yes, the vaccine is being rushed. And we have, Fauci saying, maybe it's only going to be, or Bill Gates, saying maybe it's only going to be 50 or 60% effective. And what about the contraindications? But never mind that, because we must have a vaccine, or the world is going to stay, or the United States is going to stay closed forever. What Thursday's paper didn't have, and neither did Friday's, was any mention of Nancy Pelosi's scandalous visit to a San Francisco hair salon that was closed by state order. The only mention of the Times of the event and the video of her in the salon was an online AP story. It, however, featured a video of Pelosi calling the incident a setup and demanding an apology from the salon owner. Talk about hiding the news. A casino that loaded its dice that way would get busted. Friday's Page One carried this headline over an editorial labeled as a news analysis: Trump's trusted ploy, spreading distrust. We are long removed from any possible claim that McKay's Times is fair and impartial. He has single-handedly abolished more than a century of standards in pursuit of his white whale, defeating Donald Trump. And he mentions, of course, in the 30s, the paper cozied up to Stalin and ignored the famine in the Ukraine, then downplayed the Holocaust and later supported the rise of Fidel Castro while hiding his commitment to communism. I could also mention that it was Judith Miller of the New York Times who was the leading cheerleader. She never stopped thumping that drum that the United States had to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and he was definitely going to use them in a devastating way. This was entirely made up. I don't have any problem with partisanship of newspapers and magazines. Again, if you want to go back a century or so, or before Time magazine journalism started dominating journalism with this notion of impartiality, you had Democrat papers, Republican papers, you had labor papers, you had papers that represented the interests of capital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone understood where these papers stood. This illusion of impartiality, when coupled with relentless partisanship, is the worst of all possible worlds. I mean, ideally, the New York Times could foam at the mouth about Trump, and people would say, well, I mean, that's the New York Times. What do you expect? Instead, the New York Times is America's newspaper of record. Well, that's a preposterous idea. And I hope I live long enough, a preposterous idea. And I hope I live long enough to see the end of it. Noel Schachtman reports, Planned Parenthood, indivisible, whatever that is, Move On, SEIU, which is a big labor union, American Federation of Teachers, Color of Change, and other progressive groups are bracing for and trying to make plans to counter MAGA violence after Election Day, projection.text. Molly Hemingway responded, resistance figures signaling that they are prepping for violent resistance to the 2020 election if they lose, all while claiming that what they're actually doing is preparing for widespread GOP violence. Really, some interesting projection and propaganda here. More from Five Killer, Cinco Jodas, on the coup and on Trump's Labor Day speech. To those of you worried about the coup, Trump's comments Monday were designed to take the political generals, especially the Raytheon GE Lockheed generals, the ones who've lined up with the deep state, out of the game. The boomer cons love generals, even the stupid, greedy, feckless generals who've long inhabited the upper reaches of our military and the graft-filled boardrooms of the defense contractors. So Trump had to give boomer cons a reason to be wary of the mealy-mouthed generals who oppose him. Now, when push comes to shove, the people on the right can distinguish between shitty generals and good troops. The troops do support Trump, Mr. Boomer. Go right on loving them, but the generals are scummy. Feel free to despise them. Also, LOL many times at Trump converting millions of boomer cons into practical pacifists, or rather stalwart Jacksonians, willing to use force only when it's actually in America's interests. And I'm not joking when I said Smedley Butler would have loved Trump. No doubt about it. I'm reminded of a joke from Armando Iannucci's series, Trump, that Kent, who is the chief pollster, political advisor to the president, he has arrived in New Hampshire, where the vice president's campaign is doing very badly, and he seems unusually distressed. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus says, "What is it? Are we at war?" And he responds, "Ma'am, America is always at war." And people have gotten used to this idea. No, it would be inconceivable if America were not prosecuting a whole host of wars all over the world. And the reason that the military-industrial complex and the neoliberals hate Trump so much, well, one of the reasons is that he's saying that it is not necessary for the United States to be at war in multiple places around the world at the same time. So the jig may be up for Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz. You may have heard about the deal that they signed with Netflix. And this deal has already been subject to a great deal of mockery, by me, a couple of days ago, from the New York Post. Well, some reports have said Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's production deal signed this week with Netflix could be worth as much as $150 million. Hollywood insiders scoffed at the purported number and said the ex-royals likely got much less. Grey's Anatomy hitmaker Shonda Rhimes has a reported $150 million deal with Netflix. Yes, Shonda Rhimes has a track record of successful shows, while Blackish creator Kenya Barris's Netflix deal is reported to be worth $100 million. A top Hollywood talent agent said he'd be shocked if the ex-royals deal was worth more than $2 million a year. Others agreed and pointed out they're going to be producers, not content creators like Rhimes. An Oscar-nominated producer told us Hollywood is all about comps, meaning comparable salaries around the industry. If I was their agent, I would have asked Netflix to give me the Obama money, not the amount of a proven Hollywood player. It has not been disclosed how much Barack and Michelle Obama made on their Netflix deal or how many years Harry and Meghan's pact will run. They will launch a yet-to-be-named production company, and Deadline reported that in development so far are a nature docuseries, because there are so very few of them, an animated series celebrating inspiring women. Why inspiring women like Meghan Mertz? An insider told Page Six that Quibi and others had been trying to woo the couple before they signed with Netflix. Well, apparently the royal couple, or formerly royal couple, they still have their titles. We'll see for how long. Oh, yes, Harry is so committed to charity, which is why, of course, why he fled from Britain. But he was keeping his ties with the Invictus Games. And I'll read from Wikipedia. The Invictus Games is an international adaptive multi-sport event created by Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, in which wounded, injured, or sick armed services personnel and their associated veterans take part in 9 sports, including wheelchair basketball, sitting volleyball, and indoor rowing. Named after Invictus, Latin for unconquered or undefeated, the event was inspired by the Warrior Games, a similar event held in the United States. Well, Harry no longer has a connection to the Invictus Games. Why? Because of Netflix. What? I don't get it. Well, these games were going to be broadcast by Amazon Prime, and Amazon is, of course, a leading streaming rival of Netflix. So Harry's out. So much for his devotion to Britain's veterans. The Harry Markle website, which I highly recommend, writes, finally, Harry has repaid the cost of the renovations from Frogmore College, allegedly, according to the press. But why now? Could it be that pressure had been mounting because he'd splashed out on an expensive mansion and didn't bother to repay what he owed? You can't parade around flaunting your wealth when you have public debts. I don't know about that. No one knows where the funds came from, although it is claimed it was money from the Netflix deal, but it could have come from the Bank of Pa or a release of funds from the trust fund. I'm more inclined to believe the latter because several MPs went on record last week stating that public funds must be repaid as soon as possible. And given that the Sussexes appear to have the funds, then they had a duty to repay the debt as soon as possible. The special payment plan, a monthly payment to include rent for Frogmore, didn't sit well with the public, and it was bad publicity for the royal family in general. I assume some aides felt that it would help the royal family and the Sussexes to repay the debt due to the public hostility. Do they honestly think that is enough? Of course not. The titles have to go, and the people also want the security costs of the wedding to be repaid. Out of the two, I think the former is more likely, and I doubt their tenure at the Queen's Commonwealth Trust will last much longer, considering the Invictus Foundation was stabbed in the back and slapped in the face by gutless Harry, who got his lawyer to deliver the news of him breaking his promise to assist in a fundraiser for June 2021. Yes, you read that right, and it's September 2020 right now. The alleged reason for Harry and Meghan Mertz backing out is COVID-19, but before it was supposed to be a conflict of interest, as the fundraiser was going to be streamed on Amazon, competitor of Netflix, but that's completely irrelevant. Harry wasn't going to be producing the event, but was going to show up for his usual 10 minutes to do a motivational speech, and that's it. How could it have been a conflict of interest? The news broke on September the 6th, and the public reaction was of fury. If Harry could do this to his claimed beloved charity that he founded, then what sort of person was he? If he really wanted to do it, then he'd find a way, but he was gutless and got his lawyer to do his dirty work. Those at Invictus have been left disappointed and angry at Harry because to break a promise and then not even have the decency to deliver the news personally is shallow. That's what Meghan Mertz does, and it appears that is what Harry does now. I'm trying to think of someone, a comparison, of someone who pissed away public goodwill so thoroughly and in such a record time as Meghan Mertz. And I don't know, I'm drawing a blank. It would appear that everything, the marriage, what was this marriage about? The marriage was about getting paid. That Meghan Mertz was a B-list actress on a show called Suits. And of course, what? She got married 39 years old. Time in Hollywood is not kind to middle-aged women. And Meghan is on the cusp of being middle-aged. So she needed an alternative source of funding and of status. And she found it in a chap, a stupid fellow called Prince Harry. Let's go back to the chat, see if anything is happening there. Why is there no Nussecks, silly Saxons? Walrus Libertarian says, do you believe Charles is not Harry's father? No, I do not believe that. I do not believe that Charles is Harry's father. I believe his father is James Hewitt, who was a military equerry. Is that the term that they use? Who was known to be one of Princess Diana's lovers. The resemblance between the two is quite remarkable. Also, this could happen naturally, but Henry is really marketably stupider than his brother. Charles is obviously a man of high intelligence. He's a man of dubious judgment, but he is quite an intelligent man. Of course, sometimes there is a, regression to the mean. Howper, was Harry the one who wore an SA uniform to a party? Yes, it was handmade, too. Metal Mike says, Meghan pulled the ultimate WAP move. That's good. Yo Mama says, I think she's a literal succubus. I won't repeat the word that Prince Charles supposedly used to describe Harry's infatuation with Meghan Mertz because it is too crude for this program. But the French non-crude version, the French call it a coup de foudre. CPP's payroll must look very interesting. CNN, Google, ABC, NY, and New York Times, etc., says de Boreas. Donald Robertson, the Democrats work for the media, not the other way around. It's a symbiotic relationship. Wasn't time some sort of deep state creation, says Laramie Hirsch? Well, Henry Luce was very close to the U.S. government. No question about that. Time was supplied free of charge to American soldiers serving during World War II. I believe Life magazine was as well. Marcia McLuhan reported something fascinating about that. That at Time Life, they thought that the soldiers would be delighted to get these free magazines, but it turns out they were angry. What were they angry about? What happened to the ads? The ads? Why do you want to see the ads? Because we want to know what people are buying in America. And it gives you an idea of, how important advertising is. Chogokin 666, Toilet Jesus Guy, and Cardi B. It's all class. Donald Robertson says vitamin D might be effective in preventing COVID-19 symptoms. Well, I take vitamin D. And it has been useful to me over the years in many ways. I must say, it seems to be a prophylactic against colds and flu. That has been my experience, and it has been the experience of many others. Again, I'm not a physician, and this is not expert advice. Is the live stream choppy? Really? Oh, I appreciate it if you wouldn't mention Bagpipe's actual name in the chat, because I've been nuked before for this. The U.S. was founded on secession, says Howper. But as the old saying goes, if treason doth prosper, none dare call it treason. C and zinc. Yes, I do take zinc. I'm sorry, I was confusing vitamin D with zinc. It's zinc I take as a prophylactic and also for another purpose. Dionysius says, what are the chances with zinc? It's zinc I take as a prophylactic and also for another purpose. Dionysius says, what are the chances of a civil war at this point? I don't know. It depends on what you consider to be a civil war. I mean, this, what they're talking about, no concession for Biden, sandbags, military taking Trump out, the riots in the streets of every city, obviously pressuring federal government employees. That is certainly an insurrection. I don't know whether it could be characterized as a civil war. Let's talk about the People's Republic of Victoria, Australia. A story from Gidgen Rosner in the American Conservative. COVID dystopia comes to Melbourne. A recent arrest of a pregnant woman now facing 15 years shows how badly Australia succumbed to public health tyranny. It was an image that shocked Australia and soon went global. A pregnant woman handcuffed in her own kitchen in front of her children as police officers seized every computer, tablet, and cell phone in the house before frog marching her off to the station. It's the treatment that Australians are used to seeing meted out to drug traffickers, suspected terrorists, and child pornography rings. But in Zoe Bueller's case, her crime was a Facebook post. Zoe had tried to organize a protest against coronavirus restrictions in place in the state of Victoria. For this, she was charged with incitement and now faces a sentence of up to 15 years. She has been released on bail and will go to court in January. The most remarkable thing, though, is that it's taken until now for some sort of protest movement to emerge. Melbourne, Victoria's capital city, has been under some form of lockdown since March. When the coronavirus first hit, the premiers governing Australia's 8 states and territories descended into a kind of unspoken competition to see who could take the toughest action against the virus. That is to say, which leader could close the most businesses, destroy the most jobs, and stifle the most liberties in the name of being seen to be doing something about the virus. And I will mention, as I've mentioned previously, that the number of cases and deaths in Australia is so small that this doesn't constitute any kind of a crisis. It is more of a nuisance than anything else. This was a contest that hard left Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews won by a mile. And I want to repeat something about Andrews that I had said, that I pointed out previously. Let's see, he was born in 1972. And he was educated at a Marist Brothers College. He attended Monash University. Graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Politics and Classics in 1996. After graduating, Andrews became an electorate officer for federal Labor MP Alan Griffin. He worked at the party's head office from 1999 to 2002, initially as an organizer and then as an assistant state secretary. Following his election to Parliament in 2002, he was appointed Parliamentary Secretary of Health in the Steve Brack's Labour government. 2006, he was appointed to the cabinet, and he became Labour Party leader in Victoria in 2010. That is to say that Daniel Andrews has never held a job in the private sector, and he was never a backbench MP. He started out as a parliamentary secretary. This is a man who is totally divorced from the concerns of the mass of people. Of course, this is now increasingly the case in Canada, the United States, Britain, everywhere. These people have sought power, have lusted after power from the time that, they were 10 or 12 years old. And everything that they have done in their life is devoted to climbing up that greasy pole. They are not normal people, which explains why they hate normal people. And I don't think that hate is too strong a word. 6 months later, Melbourne is still under what is by far the strictest lockdown in Australia and probably the world. At time of writing, a citywide curfew applies between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. Melburnians are permitted to leave the house for exercise for an hour a day and in groups of no more than 2. You're allowed to go out to get food as well, but only by yourself and only once a day. The increasingly few people with jobs must carry a government-issued permit indicating that they're allowed to go to work, and even then only if your job is deemed essential. If this shatters your idea of Australia as a rugged, relaxed, irreverent wonderland, then I apologize. That Australia died long ago, to the extent that it ever really existed at all. Australia has no First Amendment, and its political culture is closer to continental Europe than the United States. Fundamental freedoms have been largely left to conventions inherited from the British. They have proved fragile, though nobody ever imagined that they would be this fragile. The fact that Melbourne has allowed itself to be decimated, poor word choice there, in the name of the coronavirus is as predictable as it is heartbreaking. It's a city a bit like San Francisco or Seattle, a beautiful, vibrant, dynamic metropolis that until now had among the best food, culture, and nightlife in the world. But like America's coastal cities, left-wing politics is a package deal. Street art in aid of one asinine cause or another becomes almost part of the scenery. Daniel Andrews knows this and exploits it. Somewhere along the way, he picked up the playbook of Democrats who preside over dysfunction, poverty, crime, and thinly veiled corruption, and make up for it by wheeling out some woke gimmick every so often, almost always involving vast sums of public money. The coronavirus has given him the best talking point of all: the economy versus human life, because of course the economy has nothing to do with human life, just as buildings have nothing to do, property has nothing to do with human life. It is the recurring theme in Andrew's interminable press conferences, daily sermons that are so theatrical and dishonest that they would make Andrew Cuomo, the love gov, dishing it 24/7, blush. Behind him, always a purple banner with the state government's Orwellian coronavirus slogan, which can also be found plastered on billboards all over the city: staying apart keeps us together. At this point, one feels like, Donald Sutherland in the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or Kevin McCarthy in the original. Wake up, people! Can't you see what's going on? Staying apart keeps us together. Absolutely shameless. Absolutely shameless. And yes, so here's another report from Australia. This is from Sky News. In Australia, once the lockdown is over in Victoria, residents are going to flock to the other states in droves for a new life, said Sky News host Peter Gleeson. The story is called "Victoria to Become Closest Thing Australia Has Seen to a Soviet-Style State." He revealed his own post-COVID prediction, which paints a dire picture for those living in Victoria. "I have no qualms saying that I've never seen a more decrepit, rudderless, hopeless, arrogant government than the one running the show in Victoria. The damage for Victoria will be all-consuming. The economy will take a generation to recover, all because Victorians elected the wrong guy." Yeah, First Amendment. Someone called Ned Nikoloff, PhD, tweeted, "Victoria has imposed on its citizens a full martial law with curfew and police arrests in the name of limiting the COVID-19 spread. Such political measures have no medical justification. This is what happens in the absence of a Bill of Rights." And I responded, "America has a Bill of Rights and Canada has a Charter of Rights. They have proved worthless against the COVID-19 panic and the sanitary dictatorship." Oh, so here's a bedwetting story about Toronto. This is from the Hollywood Reporter. As Toronto Film Fest screenings go mask optional, attendees fear event will be a coronavirus super spreader. Oh no. The fest's decision, I should point out that the TIFF, as they like to call it, is easily the most important film festival in North America, and rivals the Cannes Film Festival as being the most influential in the world. The Fest's decision not to require face coverings in theaters is raising concerns about the safety of in-person viewings. While the Venice Film Fest and major U.S. cinema chains have mandated face masks during movie screenings to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, TIFF, which is offering both in-person and virtual screenings, has adopted a more relaxed stance that makes masking up compulsory in its TIFF Bell Lightbox venue, but not when seated in cinema. In a statement to the Hollywood Reporter, Toronto organizers insist that they're strictly following the advice of public health experts, which limits the Bell Lightbox venue to 50 socially distanced patrons per screen, among other safety precautions. The 5 Lightbox theaters can collectively seat more than 1,200 moviegoers. Mandates from Toronto Public Health Office can be opaque. Masks are mandatory in indoor public spaces, and filmgoers must wear them everywhere in the theater, but can remove them when in their seats. At TIFF screenings at outdoor venues, including drive-ins, wearing a mask is optional, although it's recommended when physical distancing cannot be maintained, according to Toronto Public Health spokesperson, Dr. Vanita Dubé. Vanita Dubé, yeah, she's not a Canadian. Isn't it curious how so many of these public health officials are not Canadian? And I mention this, it's significant because non-Western peoples have no commitment to freedom, to liberty. No, it's all about the strong horse and the weak horse. That's all it is for them. The left secretly preps for MAGA violence after election day, from a stamp sign at the Daily Beast. Yes, of course. Yeah, it's Trump. Trump's going to be violence. Oh, another bedwetting story from the Associated Press. The summer of COVID-19 ends with health officials worried. Oh no, we can't have that. The lost summer of 2020 drew to a close Monday with many big Labor Day gatherings canceled across the U.S. and health officials pleading with people to keep their distance from others so as not to cause another coronavirus surge like the one that followed Memorial Day. Downtown Atlanta was quiet as the 85,000 or so people who come dressed as their favorite superheroes or sci-fi characters for the annual Dragon Con convention met online instead. This is one of the few times when these people actually left their homes. But I don't know. Perhaps they can have coffins delivered or crypts made, and they can be entombed there. So even in death, the nerds would never have to leave their rooms. Huge football stadiums in places like Ohio State and the University of Texas sat empty. Many Labor Day parades marking the unofficial end of summer were called off, and masks were usually required as the few that went on. Please, please do not make the same mistakes we all made on Memorial Day weekend. Wear your mask, watch your distance, and wash your hands, Dr. Raul Pino, State Health Director in Orange County, Florida. Yes, well, we've seen the recent news that, yes, many more cases because of much more testing, hospital occupancy falling, continue to fall, number of deaths falling, continue to fall, even as they have their thumbs on the scale. And, well, what does the newspaper of record have to say about all this, I wonder? Because it's not official until the New York Times has weighed in. Oh, this is hilarious. Northeastern University dismisses 11 students for breaking virus rules, but keeps their tuition, because of course they would. Here's what you need to know. How I hate that childish stance. Don't tell me what I need to know. In any event, Northeastern ousts 11 students for violating safety protocols and keeps their $36,500 tuition. The first famines of the coronavirus era at the world's doorstep, the UN warns. Yes, that's because we've deliberately smashed the economy. The lockdown in Melbourne is extended by 2 weeks amid protests. What protests? Not in the streets, not even on Facebook, because you can get 15 years in jail for it. To counter fears over Trump's urgency for a vaccine, 5 drug companies plan a joint safety pledge. Yes, in one of the harshest punishments imposed to date against students for violations of coronavirus safety protocols, Northeastern dismissed 11 first-year students this week and declined to refund their tuition after they were discovered crowded into a room at a Boston hotel. Oh my God, serving as a temporary dormitory. About 800 students are staying in 2-person rooms at the hotel, the Westin, which is less than a mile from Northeastern's Boston campus. They don't have dormitories anymore? Is there something special about the Westin? 2 university staff members making rounds on Wednesday, squealers, discovered the gathering, which violated university rules against any guests, visitors, or additional occupants. In addition, the students were not wearing masks or practicing social distancing in defiance of university requirements, a university spokeswoman, Renata Nayul, said. Northeastern's move comes as colleges across the country are struggling to figure out how to stop campus partying. I don't know, maybe they could give the male students injections of estrogen. Perhaps that would help. Well, this is from the Chicago Tribune. Northwestern University president apologizes. Fine. Yes. Okay. He finally came to his senses. Nope. And reduces tuition after shifting first and second year students to remote learning. Yeah. How long? If you don't need to come to the university, why do you need the university? These idiots haven't thought this through. They clearly haven't thought this through. Facing backlash from angry first and second year students who recently learned they can't study at Northwestern University's campus this fall, school president Morton Shapiro repeatedly apologized during an online presentation Tuesday and tried to provide some more details about how the last-minute decision was made. During the one-hour session, Shapiro said he was absolutely convinced that NU could reopen its residence halls to all students, but began to worry late last week as COVID-19 cases rose in suburban Cook County, and the school had readjusted its capacity to quarantine students on campus based on estimates from the state. I apologize for people who are so angry, and I understand that anger as a parent and as an educator, Shapiro said. In retrospect, I probably should have decided earlier in the week. How long is this scam going to last for? Peter Hitchens wrote Sunday in the Mail on Sunday. We have ceased to be a parliamentary democracy. There was no military putsch. Nobody passed an enabling act allowing rule by decree, but now the House of Lords and the House of Commons are now the dead parliament. Isn't it funny that it was supposed to be the right-wingers that were going to take away all the liberty? It was the right-wingers that were going to go initiate a dictatorship. And it's been left-wingers overwhelmingly who have done this, and crickets. Crickets. They are dead because they do nothing to hold the government to account. They are parrots because when asked, they obediently confirm decrees Downing Street put into effect, sometimes weeks before. We used to jeer that the so-called parliaments of communist and fascist states were mere rubber stamps. Well, we cannot jeer now. The most shocking instance of this so far was the £10,000 fine imposed on the eccentric weather forecaster Piers Corbyn, brother of Jeremy, for his part in organizing a protest in London. That protest has, in my view, been wrongly portrayed as a mass of weirdos and conspiracy theorists. No doubt such people and worse were there, but many went to it out of a feeling their liberties are fast disappearing under a strange new regime based on fear and panic. The regulation used to fine Corbyn, 5B of the Coronavirus Act, was hastily made law the day before the demonstration was held. It was introduced under an emergency procedure and was neither debated nor given even the most cursory scrutiny by any parliamentary process. Well, Parliament continued to meet even during the Second World War, even when London was being bombed. But now there's this scary, vicious, racist virus out there, and we are helpless against it. This act permits the most junior community support officer in the country to issue a fixed penalty notice to the suspected organizer of a political event, demanding £10,000 to avoid prosecution and consequent financial ruin. Given its time, even if it was not introduced with the purpose of targeting the organizers of a political protest against government policy, it is very much that appearance. So a hugely important law, greatly shrinking the freedom of every Englishman, was made on Friday and used, in my view, rather selectively on Sunday. No green paper, no white paper, no first and second readings, no committee stage, no revision by the upper house, no wait for royal assent, just wham, thump, down goes the rubber stamp, and you must pay up. Challenge this in the courts, and you could end up with an unlimited fine and ultimately prison. But there was not even the pretense of a trial, which in my view is a blatant breach of the Bill of Rights of 1689. The police just grabbed Corbyn, Belarus style, and held him for hours before presenting him with an enormous bill. Yet months of mostly left-wing protests by Black Lives Matter or against politically incorrect statues went by with hardly a whisper of action, for it is one of the features of our new state of fear that it acts with ferocity against anyone who suggests the fear is misplaced. If you refuse to be afraid of a not very severe outbreak of disease, which is largely over, you'll have to be afraid of the heavy hand of the law. Now, there was the newspapers didn't come out. The printed versions of the newspapers did not come out on Sunday because of a climate extinction rally. They physically prevented it. And did all of these people get their £10,000 fines? No, of course they didn't. Where will this end? I cannot say, but I think it unwise to wait and see. In the Australian state of Victoria, whose laws are very much the same as ours, we may view the future. The people of Melbourne are now under a strict curfew and may only leave their homes for a short period each day, following a very small number of COVID deaths. Yes. And Toby Young writes in Lockdown Skeptics, postcard from Dystopia Land. That would be Disneyland Paris. And someone wrote saying that we decided to set off to Paris and bear the consequences of quarantine. Unfortunately, what we encountered upon arrival was worse than anything I could have ever anticipated. Disneyland Paris is no more. What used to be a beaming beacon of American enlightenment values, liberty, and human potential has been radically shifted and morphed into the exact opposite. Disney is now Dystopia Land, a corporate conditioning exercise promoting the new normal, merchandise to boot, which means you get to go to dystopia and keep the face mask. Annoyingly, I'd missed the clues to Disney's capitulation to this state of affairs. A few weeks ago, Disney had put out some exceptionally creepy mask-ridden propaganda in a bid to prevent the illusion things were business as usual. I only caught the video once. We were already here. Had I seen it before, I might have saved myself £1,000. My rationale for going had instead been misguided by an absolutely delightful trip to Peppa Pig World early in August, where normalcy, common sense, and fun had properly prevailed. Plus, I had wrongly assumed that outdoor mask wearing, while recommended, would somehow be rationally and compassionately enforced. How wrong I was. There's nothing quite like the Disneyland experience in France, a country that is now enforcing mask wearing everywhere, to make you realize the extent to which the rule has had absolutely nothing to do with virus suppression and everything to do with social control, population conditioning, and the normalization of a Nazi-like mentality among those entrusted to police the standard. And that really is what is truly frightening. At the top of the pyramid lie the Maus Gestapo, intimidating-looking private security guards bearing what appear to be either guns or, at minimum, a taser arsenal. They monitor the outdoor areas, demanding full compliance with the company's mask-wearing protocol at all times. The usual exemptions that work in Britain simply do not apply. Don't bother telling a stormtrooper you have asthma or a visceral fear of masks. You will be escorted out of the park pronto. The only exemption comes by way of a signed-off medical release, which entitles the visitor to a colored exemption wristband. No wristband, no exemption. The act of enforcement of the standard on people simply peeking their noses out while walking many meters apart is what's really gut-wrenching. If the stormtroopers don't get you, it will be the park employees that do. They're the next down in the structural enforcement order. Excuse me, they shout if they spot a stray nostril. Put on your mask properly. It must be worn over your mouth and nose at all times, or else it is not effective and you will put other visitors in danger. The shaming is very loud, clear, and self-righteous. Eating and drinking is a key park revenue generator, so there's obviously an exemption for that. But here is where even greater madness lies. Word from staff is that after outdoor mask wearing was first mandated, people were buying bottles of water and carrying them around to avoid the masks. But that is now verboten. A mask must be maintained on your chin, literally on your chin, at all times, even if you are walking and drinking or eating. The only time you can remove it is while sitting down to eat or drink or in the privacy of the public conveniences. The walking rule is perhaps the most egregious example of the disingenuous norms at hand. If this was really about virus control, nobody would be encouraging people to keep a mask on their chin while scoffing popcorn or ice cream. All of this leads to a highly dystopic and sinister experience. The reality is that without the feedback of smiles or happy expressions, there is no fun or laughter to be had. The human spirit is highly sensitized to such feedback. Well, I guess in the future it will all be virtual. So, I mean, we don't need to see people's faces. We don't need facial. The government will tell us what the cues are, or what the results should be. This could have gone into, I don't know, the Scum portion of the show, but I'm going to put it here because it's just fatuous. This is from Angus Reid, which is one of Canada's leading pollsters. Economic outlook. COVID-19 stalls trend of growing financial optimism in Canada. Canadians continue to re-enter the employment market. 250,000 more jobs were added across the country in August, but the negative impacts of the COVID-19 outbreak on personal finances and the economy have soured Canadians on their future financial outlook. A new study from the nonprofit Angus Reid Institute finds that a 3-year trend of increasing optimism among Canadians about what the coming year holds for them financially has ended abruptly. Indeed, since 2018, the number of Canadians saying their standard of living will improve over the next 12 months had nearly doubled, from 16% to 30%. This quarter, however, the proportion saying this had dropped by 5 points. I suppose that you're supposed to, in a democracy, you're supposed to have a informed citizenry. And any Canadian who, even before COVID-19, had growing financial optimism about Canada is an idiot. The Canadian economy was already in serious disarray, near disaster conditions, even before COVID, because the collapse of oil prices. This contributes about 18% of federal revenues. All of the ancillary services around the oil and gas industry, the malaise in the mining industry because of Indian interference in the granting of mining licenses. Oh, yes, and the demonstrations that we saw on behalf, supposedly, of the Indigenous people earlier in this year. But apparently, most Canadians had a sense of growing optimism. Based on what? Based on the government of Canada saying that things can only get better. And the media parroting. In effect, the media in Canada, even more to the extent than the United States, journalists feel that it is their job to lightly rewrite government press releases. That is what they do. And so Princess Rockstar, aka Justin Trudeau, will say, "Oh yeah, things are going to be better. They're going to be great. We're going to shift to a green economy." Oh, and how many $1 trillion is that going to cost? Oh, and the oil and gas is going to have to be left in the ground. Oh, really? And where's the proof that this so-called green economy can even work at scale? Never mind that. Well, I'll work it out somehow. That even before COVID-19, Canada's economic policy was borrow yourself rich. Oh, let's see. I want to talk about sports for a few minutes here. I was shown a video today, and I think it is from Korea. Let's see, MBC Sports. I don't know what that is actually. Let me just check here. But it is about K-pop. Okay, so it is a Korean site. And it was about the Toronto Blue Jays and all of the exciting comebacks they've had in the last week or two. Now, the Blue Jays are currently in second place in their division, and they've got a fairly good chance of making the playoffs. But of course, there's no fans that are allowed to see the games. And I frankly do not understand, for the life of me, how you could not get, say, 12,000, 15,000 people in the Rogers Center while still maintaining this ridiculous 2-meter rule. But it just seems that Major League Baseball, like the other sports, has decided to show how extra virtuous it is by killing their own business. Yes, Tampa Bay, which is having an incredible run, 28 wins and 14 losses, is 4.5 games ahead of the Blue Jays, who are at 23 and 18. Blue Jays apparently have a 90% chance of making the playoffs. Blue Jays pitching, not so great. Very weak. But their bats are hot. And the team doesn't seem to give up when it's behind. These are the types of teams that fans go out to see. That, even if you lose a game 10-8, well, there's the excitement in the 8 runs that you scored. But no, the Blue Jays are playing in Buffalo. Oh, because they let people into the stands in Buffalo? No, they don't. They're playing in Buffalo because the Canadian government said that even players playing in an empty stadium was not safe enough for Canadians. Keep in mind, this is the same government that has allowed 5 million people to enter Canada since COVID-19 began. 5 million. Canada's a country of 38 million people. Got to keep that immigration coming. Got to have those temporary so-called foreign workers. The 1% need to get richer, but no, you can't go to the Rogers Centre and watch baseball because, we have to demonstrate just how much we care about people's safety. Let's see, this is from sportskita.com, and Adam Silver, he really looks like a vampire. He's the commissioner of the NBA. All eyes on conference semifinals with NBA TV ratings down by a whopping 27%. The first round of the NBA playoffs was concluded in riveting fashion as plenty nail-biting encounters were on display for the fans to soak in. Ironically, though, the NBA TV ratings still went down in comparison to previous seasons. Many people across the US of A and the rest of the globe felt that the NBA was too involved in political matters in the country and less focused on playing basketball. I don't know how they could have come to that conclusion. Maybe it has something to do with the Milwaukee Bucks deciding to forfeit a game by not coming out of their locker room to play and then being told, yeah, we understand how upset you are over Brianna or George or that guy in Rochester. So we're just we've already got this tiny season in the bubble, but we're going to cancel the games for several days. President Donald Trump, too, shared the same views and ridiculed the NBA for having low TV ratings. He said people are tired of watching the highly political NBA. Basketball ratings are way down, and they won't be coming back. I hope football and baseball are watching and learning because the same thing will be happening to them. Stand tall for our country and our flag. Many viewers took to Twitter to announce they were no longer interested in watching the NBA, while a majority supported the causes for which the league had taken a stand over the past few weeks. That didn't help recover the NBA TV ratings because it's a question of margins, isn't it? If 60% of people support of NBA fans support the NBA's political stance on Black Lives Matter, and if 40% are opposed to it, and a significant portion of those are strongly opposed to it, that is very bad news. In the regular, the figures behind the fall in NBA TV ratings is a matter of concern for the league and its commissioner, Adam Silver, aka B-Ball Nosferatu. In the regular season alone, the NBA TV ratings had dropped by 12% from last year. Despite the popularity of streaming platforms and the NBA League Pass that allows viewers to watch on the go, the NBA TV ratings could not be saved from dropping. After the NBA hiatus due to the pandemic, NBA TV ratings were expected to go up since fans could no longer make it to the arenas. Shockingly, it dropped even further to 27% in the first round of the NBA playoffs. The NBA TV ratings have been on a downward slope for a while now, and when compared to the 2017 to 18 season, the 2019 to 2020 season has seen a 40% drop in viewership. Keep in mind, no fans are allowed in the arenas. There's been a lot of talk on the right, the dissident right, about, sports ball and its hold on Americans. It also has a tremendous hold on Canadians as well. Primarily the NHL, of course. Yeah, the Raptors. Yes, a great Canadian pride there. Having a bunch of Americans play basketball in Toronto. But you see, basketball stopped and baseball stopped. And the world didn't come to an end, as they like to say. And the longer this went on, I think that the people got used to it. And I'm sure not a few people said, yeah, I used to have this crazy fascination with basketball, not just watching the games, but watching the highlights, reading the stories, following the stats, and of course the fantasy league. And that's it's kind of like being in a cult. And so it stopped. And I suppose a great many people have discovered that there are other things to do in life. For instance, I suppose you could spend more time with your wife and children. But one gets the impression that the reason that sports ball has been so popular in North America is that men do not want to spend time with their wives and children. I suppose the question is whether the NBA, Major League Baseball, is ever going to come back. And, one looks at the NFL, which has gone further than any other league in terms of Black Lives Matter, with players can put George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and presumably Daniel Prude on the back of their helmets. Thus, every single play reminding Americans that their beloved NFL has been taken over by what is essentially a terrorist organization that hates America. One final look at the chat. Of course, the show is ending about 25 minutes late today because it started about 25 minutes late. Again, my apology. Tom Anderson, KMG is dog whistling. Am I? Let's see. Go read King Lear, says Donald Robertson. There is the other side. People are entirely bad, are they? Oh, dear. Got as bad as that, have they? Only golf and tennis are commendable. Team sports are for the lazy. They haven't played the Masters yet, have they? Because, of course, the Masters doesn't belong to the PGA. It's included, in terms of awarding points and the like, but it is not part of the PGA. The PGA is run as a registered charity, and the Masters, it's run for profit. And I would be very surprised if even a hint of Black Lives Matter in November, okay, I would be very surprised if even a hint of Black Lives Matter was allowed at the Masters. They're old school. They're November. You see, to me, I used to consume a lot of sports ball, and now I've cut it down to the Blue Jays and the 4 golf majors. And see, when it was the Masters, that meant it was spring. It's like, like the cherry blossom trees coming into bloom. The Masters are happening, so it's spring. So now it's in November. They also changed the order, of the PGA Championship is out of order now. People love traditions like that, but of course they can't stop messing with traditions. Ashley Bravo says, what would society be like under the absolute rule if KMG had absolute power? Well, I've made it clear that skateboarding, a little iffy, I think that I would require the corporal punishment of those found guilty of tagging, as the kids like to call it. And I'm still considering whether this corporate punishment, this whipping, should be done in public or not, because that is one of the things that destroys neighborhoods. It's like the broken windows that James Q. Wilson wrote about. When you see this nonsense, these squiggles in a neighborhood, it's a sign that you are not living in a good neighborhood anymore. And I think that strong efforts should be made to eliminate that habit. Okay. Let's see. Ashley Bravo again. I think he's referring to the idea that people are capable of extreme repression and abuse when possessed by the moral animus of enacting the greater good for society at large. The Jays are playing in Canada, Yoma? No, they're playing in Buffalo. There had to be an extensive and expensive refitting of the stadium in Buffalo, and no people are allowed. in it. No people are allowed in it. Oh, yes, when are people going to wake up to the reality of human nature? Well, Pascal famously said that we're constantly attempting to raise people to the level of angels. We invariably degrade them to the level of beasts. And nothing truer has ever been written. The flower, sunlight, and swaying tree branches around KMG are really aesthetically pleasing. Why, thank you. Thank you. It is a. Do you remember that pit that I was broadcasting out of, that last hotel I was in Victoria on Douglas Street, where there was no light? I couldn't get any light. That was pretty dire. That was, I don't know. It was almost nightmarish set up in that hotel. But thankfully, I'm no longer there. I want my virtual steak right now, says Dionysius. Okay. MCT says, associate yourself with men of good quality if you esteem your reputation, for it is better to be alone than in bad company. And MCT signed off there. Alrighty, so I will do the same. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Just briefly, I will mention that coming up on Theatre Thursday is a British film, Ealing Studios from 1947, one of my favorite films. It Always Rains on Sunday. And coming up on the book club on Friday is Alan Walker's 3-volume magisterial biography of the great and good man, Franz Liszt. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to contribute to this live stream, which would be greatly appreciated. It's greatly appreciated at all times, but particularly at this time, due to my status as the Flying Dutchman of the live stream world. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send money directly to me via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.